Class 1 railroads are always investing in their infrastructure to ensure that they keep freight moving and the American economy running. However, 2025 is a particularly pivotal year in this department for CSX as it aims to complete one of its biggest and most anticipated infrastructure projects, expanding the Howard Street Tunnel in Baltimore. The improvements they're making have required a complete shutdown of CSX's line through Baltimore, which has had logistical effects across the CSX system as the railroad has undertaken an extensive effort to reroute all traffic on its I-95 corridor around the tunnel closure. The ripple effects of these reroutes can be seen all over the system, including along the river subdivision in New York and New Jersey. So today, we'll take a look at these operational changes and look a bit more closely at how CSX is improving their system for the future. We start off the video in Ridgefield Park, New Jersey with train I-168. While 168 has been a regular on the River Line for years, its operations have been shifted to accommodate reroute traffic. As was common practice during COVID-19, the I-168 now carries a large block of autorack traffic on the rear end for the Dormis Avenue terminal in Newark, New Jersey. I will discuss more on the autorack operations in a moment. So what is the Howard Street Tunnel project all about? The $500 million expansion aims to address a major limitation of CSX's important I-95 corridor, raising the tunnel height to accommodate double-stack containers. Currently, CSX's premier East Coast intermodal trains I-031 and I-032 can only run single-stacked between Florida and New Jersey because of the tunnel. This limits how much service CSX can provide and puts the railroad at a major competitive disadvantage to Norfolk Southern, whose north-south route along the East Coast is clear all the way for double stacks. The solution? Lower the floor of the Howard Street Tunnel to make it tall enough, allowing CSX to add a second layer of containers to the UPS trains and run double-stacked international intermodal trains into and out of the Port of Baltimore. CSX has marketed this program as a way to vastly expand and improve service along the eastern seaboard and seeks to gain a competitive edge on Norfolk Southern. Only one problem had to be solved for this work to happen. Lowering the floor of the tunnel meant the track along one of CSX's most important routes would have to be completely closed for months. Through vigorous planning, CSX worked out a way to reroute 16 daily road freight trains completely around the tunnel. They did this primarily in two different ways. Sending trains the long way around Baltimore, having them make a left turn to head west on the B&O before navigating northwest to pick up the old New York Central water level route to Buffalo, Selkirk, and then south on the River Line, or turning off the B&O and heading to Hagerstown, Maryland for interchange to Norfolk Southern, running over their Lurgan Branch and Harrisburg lines to Philadelphia, where they would pick up CSX tracks again. To supplement these reroutes, operations, routes, and schedules to existing trains were altered to accommodate the shift in traffic. While I didn't make it out to NS this summer to catch any of those reroutes, the rest of what I have discussed will be addressed in this video. Now back in Ridgefield Park, we catch our first actually rerouted train. Coming north is M217 Autoracks out of Philadelphia, bound for Tennessee. Typically, this train would run south and west out of Philadelphia via the B&O through Maryland and Pennsylvania, but for now is utilizing the water level route to bypass Baltimore. A new SD70 Mac rebuild is leading the way as the train arrives to make a pickup at Bellman's Yard in Ridgefield Park. The switch to the Bellman's Yard is just around the corner to the south, so once the train pulls the Philadelphia cut north of that switch, it stops and reverses into the yard to make the rear end pickup. With the consist doubled up in just a few minutes, the engineer starts pulling the train out of Ridgefield Heights for the trip to Selkirk, with the conductor getting driven up to CP10 5 miles ahead to join the engineer on the lead locomotive. Rerouting M217 and its counterpart M216 via the water level route presented some logistical challenges for CSX. In North Jersey, there are two Autorack terminals that the railroad serves: Bellman's, located in Ridgefield Heights, and Dormis Avenue, located in Newark near Conrail's Oak Island Yard. The former branches right off of CSX's river subdivision at CP5, while the latter requires a run over Conrail's National Docks branch, leaving the main route through New Jersey behind. Under normal operations, CSX ran Autorack pair M267 and M268 to and from the Dormis Avenue terminal, working Ridgefield Heights en route. With the Philly racks now going via the river line, that added a third terminal to the mix, which could not simply be added to the cut of cars for the other two terminals, as the train would be far too long. The solution? M217 and its counterpart would handle the Philly racks and work Ridgefield Heights en route, since this terminal is along the main line through North Jersey. The Dormis racks, which would have required that the Philly trains take a circuitous secondary route through New Jersey, were subsequently tacked onto other trains. Loads go south on the I-168 that we just saw, which terminates at Port Newark right next to Dormis Avenue, and empties return on M434, a mixed freight train that originates at Oak Island. At Selkirk, this cut is combined with a cut from Massachusetts and the yard itself to make up a pair of massive rack trains to supplement the M216 and M217 on the Chicago line. With the redrawn service plan, M267 and M268 are abolished for now, and the train count on the river and Chicago lines remains the same. A masterful piece of logistical engineering by CSX. Now that we've covered the Autorack trains, we'll jump a few days ahead to Memorial Day weekend to catch some more unique reroute operations. We're now at CP22 on the CSX River subdivision, and coming south is train M433 bound for Oak Island Yard in North Jersey. .433 has been a Riverline staple for decades, but even it has been affected by the Baltimore traffic reroutes. Check out this large block of Tropicana refrigerated boxcar traffic on the train. Originating out of Florida and bound for the Tropicana warehouse in Jersey City, these reefers are high-priority traffic that typically ride on the head end of the hotshot I-031 and I-032 intermodal trains. However, with the tunnel closed and the hotshots currently curtailed to Baltimore, the Trops are taking the roundabout route to reach their destination, riding manifest trains via Sandpatch or Harrisburg. On this instance, M410 has brought the Trops into Selkirk from the west, and they have been forwarded to M433 to Oak Island, where a local will bring them into Jersey City's terminal. It may be a bit slower, but Tropicana is still getting their ice-cold deliveries despite the I-95 corridor being severed. Right behind 433 was the coolest type of reroute for those of us along the river line. This is train C748, coal loads from Pennsylvania bound for Console in Baltimore, taking the long way via Buffalo, Selkirk, and Philly. This territory typically sees zero coal traffic, so getting these reroutes is pretty cool, made even better by another flared SD70 Mac rebuild leader. A big part of the chess game CSX plays with these reroutes is how to run both them and the usual traffic with their available manpower. Typically, CSX has run between 1 and 2 of these coal trains daily, one being loaded and the other empty. For the purposes of the river line specifically, this offsets the loss of the rerouted M409 and M410, working to keep train counts and crew starts relatively even. It's a few weeks later in the summer now, and we will be spending the morning in the Hudson Valley along CSX's river line. It's a quiet morning as the sun rises over the Hudson River, but there is plenty of freight traffic to be moved, and it's not long before our first train arrives. First on the docket for the morning is southbound intermodal train I-158. Another Riverline staple that has run for years. Like M433, it has been pressed into service to help accommodate rerouted traffic. I-158 typically runs as far as Philadelphia, handling CSX's intermodal traffic for the city. It has been temporarily extended to Baltimore to carry the traffic that would typically be on I-138 to Penn Mary Yard. On its way south, the train will work South Kearny Yard in New Jersey and its typical destination of Greenwich Yard in Philadelphia. Of note, it has flip-flopped a few times between I-158 and I-104, being the train extended to Baltimore, although as of September 2025, it is back to being I-158, and I-104 is terminating at its usual point of South Kearny. Once again, utilizing existing trains like I-158, which typically does not run with a huge consist and therefore can handle the extra traffic bound for Baltimore, helps CSX keep freight moving to the city fluidly with the current crew availability. Meeting I-158 a few miles to the south is another Riverline regular, empty ethanol train B726, which this morning is combined with another empty consist, B780, to form an 800-axle string of empty tankers. While not directly a result of the Baltimore reroutes, as CSX has done this practice for some time, the combination of unit trains on the Riverline has become more common in recent months since the reroutes started. This makes sense, and again, it all goes back to moving this rerouted traffic with the existing local workforce. By combining B726 and B780, a crew no longer needs to take the separate B780 north, and that could free up the crew to run an empty coal train north instead. Behind B726 was one of the few completely unaffected trains by the Baltimore reroutes. I-003 is a morning staple on the Riverline carrying UPS traffic, and it still runs its normal route every day linking the New York City area with Chicago. Despite all of the changes that CSX has had to make to accommodate the reroutes, regular trains like I-003 must still be accommodated without delay. In a couple more hours, the next action is southbound I-168, once again with a combo train of international intermodal containers and autorack cars for Dormis Avenue. Take note of the ratio between well cars versus autoracks on this train. Though this train is symboled as an intermodal run, the consist is overwhelmingly autoracks. Some of these racks run on the train all the way from Chicago, arriving from major change with Union Pacific, but many are picked up in Selkirk, as I stated earlier in the video. To accommodate the space for these extra racks on this train, some of the intermodal traffic had to be shifted, which I will touch on further in a moment. Running right on 168's tail is M433 with more Tropicana traffic in the consist for Oak Island. Moving right along, up next is northbound train I-159, a backhaul of international intermodal containers from Port Newark. Like 003, this is another Riverline regular that has continued running unaffected by the reroutes. Up next and our final train of the morning at Fort Montgomery is southbound intermodal run I-010.
Out.
This priority intermodal train is the final piece of the puzzle in the Autorac service redesign for the reroutes. During the COVID-19 induced freight traffic slowdown, CSX utilized the I-010 to carry a large block of international containers to the docks at Port Newark in addition to its usual consist of high-priority domestic containers and UPS traffic. This made sense during COVID as traffic collectively was lower for both the port and the domestic intermodal terminal at North Bergen, so two trains that had previously been separated could be combined into the single I-010 to save on costs during the slowdown. This practice remained common for a couple of years before CSX tried to move away from it with rebounding traffic, restoring the I-010 to a shorter but solid train of domestic intermodal traffic and eliminating the need to slow down this priority run by making it pick up international containers. However, with the influx in rerouted rail traffic needing to be accommodated along the Chicago and River lines, CSX put this practice back into use. I-010 now once again carries a large block of international port-bound intermodal containers that used to run on I-168. This enabled CSX to shorten I-168's consist enough to add the Dormis Avenue autoracks, explaining why the I-168 we saw earlier currently has significantly less intermodal traffic than it does autos. Once again, this is a genius design by CSX to use shorter trains to redistribute existing and rerouted traffic without actually increasing local train counts. Moving south 17 miles and we catch our last train of the day, which was CSX I-157, running northbound from Baltimore with traffic from Penn Mary Yard, Greenwich Yard, and South Kearny. Like its counterpart, I-158, this is the Philly intermodal train that has been extended down to Baltimore to accommodate reroute traffic. Evidence of the extension are the international containers on the rear end of 157 coming out of the Seagirt Marine Terminal at Baltimore. In a few more days, we're back out at CP22 for a trio of trains, the first being I-158 heading south for Baltimore, this time with a bit more of a substantial consist. In about 30 more minutes, a northbound train arrives, this one being M434.
Coming this way.
Tacked onto the rear of 434 are the aforementioned empty Dormus racks heading for Selkirk to join up with M265 to head west as a unit autorack train. There is one more train to catch before we conclude our video. B705 is not a reroute at all, but the power on the head end certainly made it worth catching out on this hot July afternoon. The combination of an EMD ST70M-2 and a Canadian Cab-9 were quite the unique set and looked great pulling their 80 tank cars south towards New Jersey. With all of the operational changes due to the Howard Street Tunnel expansion, summer of 2025 has been an interesting time to be trackside on CSX in the Northeast. In just a few months, these reroutes will be no more and CSX will reopen its new and improved I-95 corridor with extremely expanded service opportunities. I hope you enjoyed learning about the impressive logistical undertaking that CSX has performed to update its infrastructure and keep traffic moving over the rails. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed.